Hello again. Welcome back to week 40 of the Religious Education Initiative, specifically of year 5. This is day 3. Last time we saw St. Paul arrive in Jerusalem and confer with James and the other leaders of the church in Jerusalem. They were concerned about his reputation among the very many Jewish Christians who had heard about him that he neglected or despised the law and taught others to do so. They themselves, James and the elders of the church, they knew and acknowledged clearly that these accusations about Paul were untrue. But their concern for the peace of the church and the correction of those slanders led them to suggest to Paul that he should join some others of the Christian community who were under a vow and were purifying themselves in preparation for entering the temple. They asked Paul to provide public support for and participation in the rites of the temple and the Torah in supporting these men who had taken the vow. He agrees and does so. So we will see this time what the result is. This is verse 27 of chapter 21. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, who had seen him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd. They seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against our people, our law, and this place. More than that, he has actually brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was aroused, and the people rushed together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. While they were trying to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. Immediately he took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. When they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the tribune came, arrested him, that's Paul, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, some another, and as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. When Paul came to the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him!" Just as Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" The tribune replied, "Do you know Greek? Then you are not the Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness." Paul replied, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of an important city. I beg you, let me speak to the people." When he had given him permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the people for silence. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language, saying, "Brothers and fathers, listen to the defense that I now make before you." When they heard him addressing them in Hebrew, they became even more quiet. Then he said, "I am a Jew, born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, educated strictly according to our ancestral law, being zealous for God, just as all of you are today. I persecuted this way up to the point of death, by binding both men and women and putting them in prison, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify about me. From them I also received letters to the brothers in Damascus, and I went there in order to bind those who were there and bring them back to Jerusalem for punishment." Now, this isn't where St. Paul stops, but we're going to stop here today, and then we'll finish his speech and see the result of it next week. For now, I want to point out 2 things. First, so far, 7 days, things have gone well. Paul paid for the shaving of the heads. He bathed with them. He entered into this with them. But some of the Jews from Asia, where he'd spent a lot of time, that's around the city of Ephesus, they recognize him. And they've already turned against him. They've already decided they have rejected the preaching of Jesus as the Messiah, and therefore they are determined to view Paul as preaching against them. So they accuse him of this to the crowd. And the crowd is already, the people at large, they're already worried about Paul. They're suspicious about Paul. And then they have this idea, because they saw a Gentile with Paul in the city, not the temple. They're thinking that he brought him into the temple and defiled the temple. So, which Paul did not do, but that's how this starts. So the good plan is disrupted because some enemies of Paul see him in the temple and raise a ruckus. Second, they're all ready to do to Paul what Paul, Saul of Tarsus, oversaw and approved the mob doing to Stephen. And I think St. Luke is writing it this way on purpose, probably because St. Paul views it in that way, right? He's accepting this. He's willingly, and he'll even say this next time. At least he'll reference it, because he's talking about how he was, he was persecuting the way to the point of death. This is on his mind. He's like, I used to be you, and he basically begins. That's how he speaks to them. He says, please listen to me, because I used to be you. What you're doing, what you're zealous for, your determination and willingness to kill by mob, that was me. I would have been right there with you. I was right there with you in this very place. He's got deja vu, but he's on the other side now. That's the point. And with that being on his mind, we see there's a sense in which Paul has submitted himself to justice, because it would be just for him who approved and oversaw the killing of Stephen to suffer the same fate. He accepts it. God intervenes and brings the tribune. Now, the tribune doesn't know that God is using him. The tribune thinks that he's captured a violent Egyptian who started up a revolt. He's surprised when Paul speaks to him in Greek. And he kind of slows down a little bit, which says the Romans don't know what's going on. They're just like, okay, there's another mob. Just grab the guy that they're fighting about. He's probably a bad guy, and so forth. So those are the two things that I want to point out. It's important that we recognize the congruity, the similarity between what happens to Paul here, what happened to Stephen, and what happened to the Lord, because also in the vicinity of the temple, the crowd is shouting, away with him. The barracks, they'd be the same barracks, where Jesus was whipped. And that's, again, it's striking. So we'll see the rest of what happens next week rather. For now, God bless you all. A blessed Pentecost, and we'll see you all next week.